Have you ever noticed how many different instruments use that same layout of black and white keys? From a giant church organ to a portable synth, the keyboard is everywhere. But how can they all sound so incredibly different? Well, today, we're going to find out.
So, picture this. You press a single key. On one instrument, you hear a beautiful soft note. On another, you get this bright, twangy sound. And on a third, a massive sound that could literally fill a cathedral. It's the exact same action, but a totally different result. So what's actually happening inside?
It helps to think of the keyboard as just the controller. It's the part the musician physically touches. But the real magic, the part that actually creates the sound, is all hidden away inside. And that's where things get really interesting. Okay, let's start with one of the oldest and most famous ways to make music with a keyboard by using vibrating strings. You're probably thinking of one instrument in particular, but there are a few key players in this category.
Right off the bat, here's the biggest difference you need to know. On a piano, when you press a key, a little felt-covered hammer swings up and hits the strings. But on a harpsichord, it's totally different. A tiny little pick, called a plectrum, actually plucks the string, kind of like a guitar pick. Hitting versus plucking, it's a small change that makes a world of difference in the sound.
Here's a cool fact. The piano's full original name was piano forte. That's Italian for soft, loud. And that was its superpower. It was a revolutionary invention because for the first time, the player could control the volume just by how hard or soft they pressed the keys.
The harpsichord, on the other hand, couldn't do that at all. No matter how you played it, its plucked strings made a bright, sharp sound at the exact same volume. So, to get some variety, builders would often add a whole second keyboard that plucked a different set of strings. If you've ever listened to Baroque music, you know that sound. Now let's talk about another stringed keyboard, the clavichord. This one wasn't meant for big concert halls. Nope, this instrument was designed for something way more private. The clavichord is super quiet. It was literally made for practicing at home without bothering anyone. And its mechanism is really unique. A little metal blade called a tangent hits the string and then stays there. Because it stays in contact, the player can actually wiggle the key and create this cool vibrating sound effect called vibrato. You just can't do that on a piano or harpsichord. And to round out this group, we have the celesta. It looks just like a tiny little piano, right? But inside, there are no strings at all. Instead, the hammers are hitting tuned metal plates. The result is that shimmering, magical, bell-like sound you've definitely heard in movies or in the Nutcracker Ballet. All right, we're leaving the world of strings behind. Now let's look at a group of instruments that are powered by a totally different force, air. To really get a sense of the power of air, just look at this number. The longest pipes in a big pipe organ can be over 30 feet tall. That is taller than a 2-story house. There's a reason they call this beast the king of instruments. So how does this monster work? Well, it's actually a 3-step process. First, an electric blower provides a constant, powerful stream of wind. Second, the organist pulls out these knobs called stops, which is how they choose which set of pipes they want to use. Then finally, when they press a key, it opens a valve and sends all that air rushing through the chosen pipes. And that's how you get that incredible, majestic sound. But not all air-powered keyboards need gigantic pipes. A lot of them use something way smaller called reeds. A reed is just a tiny, thin strip of metal. When air flows past it, it vibrates super fast and produces this really distinct, buzzing kind of tone. And that brings us to a couple of portable powerhouses. The accordion gets its air from the player pushing and pulling the bellows in and out, perfect for lively folk music. The harmonium, on the other hand, is powered by the player pumping pedals with their feet, which gives it a steady, constant sound that's great for leading a group of singers. Okay, so we've done strings, we've done air. Now let's jump forward in time and plug in, because we're entering the modern era of electric and digital keyboards. This timeline really puts it into perspective. For centuries, music was purely acoustic and mechanical. Then, around the middle of the 20th century, electricity completely changed the game. And not long after that, the digital era arrived. And suddenly the possibilities became, well, basically infinite. So early electric pianos, like the famous Rhodes or Wurlitzer models, still had moving parts inside. They weren't computers. But instead of using a big wooden box to make the sound louder, they used electromagnetic pickups, the exact same tech used in an electric guitar. These pickups turn the vibration into an electrical signal that you can send to an amplifier and make as loud as you want. And then came the synthesizer. This is where things get really wild. A synthesizer has no moving parts making the sound. It's essentially a computer that's built to create audio. It can play back perfect recordings of real instruments, or it can generate completely new sounds from scratch. That means it can sound like a violin, or a spaceship, or a bass guitar, or even a full drum kit. If you can imagine a sound, a synth can probably make it.
And of course, with all this new digital technology came one feature that might just be the most important innovation of all time, at least for parents and neighbors everywhere. Yep, the headphone jack. The ability to practice for hours and hours without anyone else having to hear every single wrong note, that's a true game changer.
So we've gone from strings to air to electricity. We've covered a ton of ground. Now let's wrap things up by looking at the one thing they all have in common and how you can keep them making music.
You know what's amazing? After all those incredible changes inside the instruments, hammers, plectrums, pipes, computer chips, the part you actually touch has stayed almost exactly the same for centuries. You've got your 7 white keys for the natural notes, your 5 black keys for the sharps and flats, with the low notes on the left and the high notes on the right. That standard is why a musician can sit down at almost any keyboard in the world and know how to play it.
And just a quick reminder, these are all pretty complex machines and they need a little care. Acoustic pianos need to be tuned regularly by a pro because changes in humidity can affect the wood and strings, and for all keyboards, keep them away from dust and direct sunlight. A quick wipe down with a soft cloth, and for electronic ones, making sure your cables are in good shape will keep them sounding great for years to come. So at the end of the day, whether it's a felt hammer striking a steel string, a blast of air rushing through a giant pipe, or a computer chip generating a digital sound wave, every single sound we talked about today starts with that one simple action: the press of a key. This keyboard layout has worked for hundreds of years, but technology never, ever stops moving. So I'll leave you with a question to think about. What's the next brand new sound, something nobody has even imagined yet, that will be played using these same black and white keys? What do you think is next?